Um, okay, we are live on YouTube, so I'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Ajnanatimrantasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutali Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yudapadakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavavcha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvidam Stamsa Jivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paljana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Deva Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakanitam Shri Krishna Karna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta the Mangalacharan Radhe Vrindavan Rishabhanu Devi Chakshurunmilitam Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Rishabhanu Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpadrubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. So last week Patitataran Prabhu stopped at 1933. This is in the chapter of the passing away of Bhishma Dev. So today we'll be looking at verse number 34. Yudi Turaga Rajo Vidumra Vishwak Kacha Lulita Shramavāri Alankritasye Mama Nishita Sharai Vibidnam Yamana Tvachi Vilasat Kvachestu Krishnatma. So any volunteers want to recite the shloka?
Dinesh, recite the sloka 3 times, Dinesh.
Okay.
Slowly recite the 3 times, then ask others to join.
Okay. Yudi Turaga Rajo Vidumra Vishwak Kacha Lulita Shramavāri Alankritasye Mama Nishita Sarail Vibidayamana Tvachi Vilasat Kavachestu Krishnatma. Yudi Turaga Rajo Vidumra Vishwak Kacha Lulita Shramavāri Alankritasye Mama Nishita Sarail Vibidyamana Tvachi Vilasat Kavachestu Krishnatma. Yudi Turaga Rajo Vidumra Vishwak Kacha Lulita Shramavāri Alankritasye Mama Nishita Sharir Vibidyamana Tvachi Vilasat Kavachestu Krishnatma. Okay, anyone?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Yuddhi Turaga Rajo Vidumra Vishwak Kachalulita Sramavari Alankristasye Mama Nishita Sarayir Vibidyamana Tvachi Vilasatka Vachestu Krishna Atma.
Okay, thank you, Mataji. Next. Hello. Anyone else?
I try, Prabhu. Prabhu, I try, Prabhu.
Okay, Prabhu. Yeah.
Yudhi Turago Rajo Vidyumara Vishwak Kacha Lulita Shramavare Alankrashtasye Mama Nishita Sharir Vibidyamana Tvachi Vilasat Kavache Tu Krishna Atma. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Anyone else?
Okay, I'll try.
Okay, Prabhu.
Yudhi Turaga Rajo Vidumra Vishwak Kacha Lulita Shrama Varyalankrtasya Mama Nishita Sharair Vibidyamana Tvachi Vilasat Kavachestu Krishna Atma. Very beautiful verse.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. Just 1 or 2 more volunteers. Yes. Jiva.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Guide me, Prabhu.
Okay.
Yudhi Duraga Rajo Vidumra Vishwak Kacha Lulita Shrama Vari Alankritasye Mama Nisita Sarair Vibityamana Tvachi Vilasat Kavachestu Krishna Atma.
Okay, thank you. Anyone
Correct,
else?
Prabhu?
Just the A and Shah. Alankritasye and then
Insha.
Nishita Sharair. Yeah.
Alan Karatastashe.
Nishita Sharair. Yeah.
Mama Nishita Taraye.
Yeah. Okay, one last person.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, shall I try Prabhu?
Sure, Mataji.
Please help me Prabhu.
Okay.
Uragarajo vidurmra vishwa kacha lulita shamavari alankritashi mama nishita sharai bibi yamana vachi vilasat kavache tu Krishna Atma.
Okay. Thank you, Mataji. Okay, so Yudhi on the battlefield, Turaga horses, Raja, dust, Vidumra, turn and ashen color, Vishwak weaving, Kacha hair, Lulita scattered, Shramavāri perspiration, Alankrita decorated with Ashe unto the face, Mama my, Nishita sharp, Sharain by the arrows, Vividyamana pierced by Tvachi in the skin, Vilasat enjoying pleasure, Kavache protecting armor, Astu let there be, Krishna unto Sri Krishna, Atma mind. Translation: on the battlefield where Sri Krishna attended Arjuna out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by the hoofs of the horses, and because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go unto Sri Krishna. Okay, just a bit of background about this verse. We know from chapter 1 of the Gita, where the first verse was spoken by Dhritarashtra, then Sanjaya. Sanjaya was explaining what was happening on the battlefield. And the third verse onwards was spoken by Duryodhana. Sanjaya was explaining what was happening, and then he saw Duryodhana speaking to Drona, and then he was bragging about the military strength of the Kauravas. So in those verses also, at one point, he will be highlighting the importance of Bhishma. He explains to his army about the importance of protecting Bhishma from all the corners, because Bhishma was the topmost fighter in the Kaurava army. And then he was also making comparisons between Bhishma and Bhima. So
telling the story of Arjuna and Duryodhana.
Hello. So from those verses, we could clearly see that Duryodhana was heavily dependent on Bhishma Dev as the topmost fighter in the on the side of the Kauravas. So he was like completely depending on Bhishma alone for victory. However, he was also aware about the soft corner which Bhishma and Drona had for the Pandavas. So at one point during the fight, Duryodhana starts to suspect whether Bhishma is really going to fight the Pandavas or not. He was like, he starts to suspect that Bhishma is being too soft on the Pandavas, and then he thinks that Bhishma is not doing enough to destroy them. So on one day, Bhishma starts to fight very intensely, and then at one point he specially targets Arjuna to kill Arjuna on the battlefield. He's like he's forced to prove himself to Duryodhana. So at that point, Bhishma was like he'll be showering arrows towards Arjuna, and even Krishna got hurt by those arrows. So at one point, we know that even Krishna, before the battle, Krishna said that he will not take up weapons to fight directly in the battle, but he said that one side will get his own army, and he himself will go to the other side, but he won't take up any weapons. He'll just be like an observer. And that's how he volunteered to be the chariot driver of Arjuna, because Duryodhana wanted to make use of Krishna's army. So Krishna chose to go to the side of the Pandavas. So even Krishna got hurt by those arrows which were showered by Bhishma. And at one point, Krishna got down from the chariot, then he took out the wheel, and he was like going to bash up Bhishma with the chariot wheel. So that is being described here in this verse, but actually Bhishma Dev is like recalling all those events. And even in this one whole chapter, we can see that Bhishma Dev is such an exalted devotee simply because he got the chance to relish the presence of Krishna right before his eyes when he was about to leave his body, and he's able to recall so many events and many other aspects about Krishna. So the purport, the Lord is the absolute form of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. As such, transcendental loving service to the Lord in one of the 5 principal relations, namely Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya, that is neutrality, servitorship, fraternity, parental affection, and conjugal love, is graciously accepted by the Lord when offered to the Lord in genuine love and affection. Sri Bhishma Dev is a great devotee of the Lord in the relation of servitorship. Thus, his throwing of sharp arrows at the transcendental body of the Lord is as good as the worship of another devotee who throws soft roses upon him. So, regardless of the fact that Bhishma Dev was showering all those arrows, Krishna accepted them as soft roses thrown upon him because it was being thrown by a devotee. It appears that Bhishma Dev is repenting the actions he committed against the person of the Lord, but factually, the Lord's body was not at all pain due to his transcendental existence. His body is not matter. Both he himself and his body are complete spiritual identity. Spirit is never pierced, burnt, dried, moistened, etc. This is vividly explained in the Bhagavad Gita. So also it is stated in the Skanda Purana. It is said there that spirit is always uncontaminated and indestructible. It cannot be distressed, nor can it be dried up. When Lord Vishnu in his incarnation appears before us, he seems to be like one of the conditioned souls, materially encaged, just to bewilder the asuras or the non-believers who are always alert to kill the Lord, even from the very beginning of his appearance. Kamsa wanted to kill Krishna and Ravana wanted to kill Rama because foolishly they were unaware of the fact that the Lord is never killed, for the spirit is never annihilated. So regarding this, we have seen from chapter 2 of the Gita, where a lot of explanation are given in the beginning of chapter 2 itself, when Krishna starts to speak to Arjuna to convince him to do his duty, because Arjuna was thinking that he is going to kill his relatives and he wanted to quit from the battlefield. But first, the second chapter is titled Sankhya Yoga. So Krishna explains to Arjuna how the material body and spirit soul are different. So when Krishna starts to speak in chapter 2 of the Gita, the first series of the verses are focused on this distinction between material body and the spirit soul. And even from there, we could clearly see that discussion was specifically focused on the individual spirit souls, Jivatmas. So as we know, Jivatmas are actually part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So in chapter 2, it is clearly stated that even the individual spirit souls cannot be destroyed. Then how can anyone even think about destroying the Supreme Lord's transcendental body? Because the Supreme Lord's transcendental body is such that there is no difference between his body and his soul. So that is the difference between the Lord's transcendental body when he appears in the material world. Even when he appears in the material world, he appears in his transcendental form. And that's why even when Krishna left the material world, he was at the age of 125 years, but he was still appearing in a very youthful manner. So that is the distinction between Krishna's transcendental body and our material body, which is subject to the 4 problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So we are aging every moment, but even at the age of 125 years, Krishna appeared to be very youthful. So just because Krishna appeared in the material world, a lot of foolish people try to equate him as one of them. That is also acknowledged by Krishna himself in Gita 9.11, where he says, Avajanati Mamuda, Manushim Tanuashritam, Paramavam Ajananto, Mamam Buddha Maheshwaram. So that's why the Asuras were thinking that they could kill him. Like Kansa was thinking that he could actually kill Krishna, but all his efforts were in vain. But in the end, it was him who got killed. And it was the same in the case of Ravana. So here the description is regarding the transcendental body of Krishna. So the transcendental body does not feel pain, unlike our material body, which is so fragile and vulnerable. Therefore, Bhishmadev's piercing of the body of Lord Krishna is a sort of bewildering problem for the non-devotee atheist. But those who are devotees or liberated souls are not bewildered. Bhishmadev appreciated the all-merciful attitude of the Lord because he did not leave Arjuna alone. Although he was disturbed by the sharpened arrows of Bhishmadev, nor was he reluctant to come before Bhishma's deathbed, even though he was ill-treated by him on the battlefield. Bhishma's repentance and the Lord's merciful attitude are both unique in this picture. So at this point, when Bhishmadev recalls that incident where he was showering arrows even towards Krishna, he starts to actually he's feeling some sort of a guilt for doing that when he is about to leave his body, but he's also appreciating the mercy of Krishna because even after being ill-treated by Bhishma, Krishna was still came to see him as he left, as Bhishma was about to leave his body. And this is a very significant event. If we look at this whole chapter, Bhishma Dev is the special position of Bhishma Dev can be seen from this one chapter alone, because in Gita chapter 8, 8.5, there's this verse spoken by Krishna where he says, Antakale chamameva smaran muktva kalevaram yaprati samadbhavam yati nash. To remember him at the time of leaving their body will attain him. So for all of us, it remains to be seen whether we are able to remember Krishna at the time when we are leaving our body or not. So that is the biggest test, the ultimate test of our spiritual journey. But in the case of Bhishma Dev, he was so fortunate to see Krishna face to face when he was leaving his body. So that's why this one chapter itself is very significant, like how Krishna is willing to give darshan to such an exalted devotee. So that itself kind of, it also speaks of Bhishma Dev's glory. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, a great acharya and devotee in the humor of conjugal love with the Lord, remarks very saliently in this regard. He says that the wounds created on the body of the Lord by the sharpened arrows of Bhishma Dev were as pleasing to the Lord as the biting of a fiancé who bites the Lord's body, directed by a strong sense of sex desire. Such biting by the opposite sex is never taken as a sign of enmity, even if there is a wound on the body. Therefore, the fighting as an exchange of transcendental pleasure between the Lord and his pure devotee, Sri Bhishma Deva, was not at all mundane. Besides that, since the Lord's body and the Lord are identical, there was no possibility of wounds in the absolute body. The apparent wounds caused by the sharpened arrows are misleading to the common man, but one who has a little absolute knowledge can understand the transcendental exchange in the chivalrous relation. The Lord was perfectly happy with the wounds caused by the sharpened arrows of Bhishma Dev. The word Vibhidyamana is significant because the Lord's skin is not different from the Lord. Because our skin is different from our soul, in our case, the word Vibhidyamana, or being bruised and cut, would have been quite suitable. Transcendental bliss is of different varieties, and the variety of activities in the mundane world is but a perverted reflection of transcendental bliss. Because everything in the mundane world is qualitatively mundane, it is full of inebrities, whereas in the absolute realm, because everything is of the same absolute nature, there are varieties of enjoyment without inebriety. The Lord enjoyed the wounds created by his great devotee Bhishma Deva, and because Bhishma Deva is a devotee in the chivalrous relation, he fixes up his mind on Krishna in that wounded condition. So in all the verses in this chapter, Bhishma Dev keeps speaking about Krishna alone. He tries to recall so many things which not just happen on the battlefield. He even tries to recall the entire journey of Krishna with the Pandavas, and he is also trying to tell the Pandavas about how Krishna is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So all these were happening after that fierce fighting. So even Bhishma Dev was, though he was showering all those arrows on Krishna, Krishna was not at all hurt because of his transcendental body. And still Bhishma Dev was so fortunate to have Krishna's darshan at the time when he was about to leave his body. So the two main things which are explained here are regarding how Krishna was willing to visit Bhishma Dev even after that fierce battle, and also about how Krishna was not at all wounded by those sharp arrows because of his transcendental body. And when we talk about this transcendental body, we can clearly see how we can actually recall about our helpless condition in this material world, because due to our material desires, we got this material body. So despite the fact that we were also originally part and parcel of Krishna in the spiritual world, we have fallen to this material world and we are encased in this material body, which is fragile in every sense. So when we try to understand the Lord's transcendental body and how we are also part and parcel of him, then we can also clearly understand how we have got in ourselves into this degraded position due to our material desires. Now text 35. Sapadi saki vacho nisamya madhye nija parayor balayor ratam niveshya stitavati para sainika yurakshna kritavati partha sake ratir namastu sake ratir mamastu. Sapadi, on the battlefield, saki vacha, command of the friend, nisamya, after hearing, madhye, in the midst, nija, his own, parayo, and the opposite party, balayo, strength, ratam, chariot, niveshya, having entered, stitavati, while staying there, parasainika, of the soldiers on the opposite side, ayu, duration of life, akshna, by looking over, kritavati, act of diminishing, partha, of Arjuna, son of Pritha, Kunti, sake, unto the friend, rati, intimate relation, mama, my, astu, let there be. In obedience to the command of his friend, Lord Sri Krishna entered the arena of the battlefield of Kurukshetra between the soldiers of Arjuna and Duryodhana, and while there he shortened the lifespans of the opposite party by his merciful glance. This was done simply by his looking at the enemy. Let my mind be fixed upon that Krishna. In the Bhagavad Gita 1.21 to 25, Arjuna ordered the infallible Lord Sri Krishna to place his chariot between the phalanxes of the soldiers. He asked him to stay there until he had finished observing the enemies he had to face in the battle. When the Lord was so asked, he at once did so, just like an order carrier. And the Lord pointed out all the important men on the opposite side, saying, here's Bhishma, here's Drona, and so on. The Lord, being the supreme living being, is never the order supplier or order carrier of anyone, whoever he may be. But out of his causeless mercy and affection for his pure devotees, sometimes he carries out the order of the devotee like an awaiting servant. By executing the order of a devotee, the Lord becomes pleased, as a father is pleased to carry out the order of his small child. This is possible only out of pure transcendental love between the Lord and his devotees, and Bhishma Dev was quite aware of this fact. He therefore addressed the Lord as the friend of Arjuna. In Gita, chapter 1, there's this quite an important verse where it all started from this point. In Gita chapter 1, 21 and 22, Arjuna Vacha, Senayor Ubayor Madhye Radam Stapaya Mechuta, Yavatetan Niriksheham, Yodhu Kaman Avasitan, Kairmaya Sa Yodhyam, Asmin Rana Samudyame. Arjuna said, O infallible one, please draw my chariot between the two armies so that I may see those present here who desire to fight and with whom I must contend in this great trial of arms. So actually in Gita chapter 1, after the description about the scene on the battlefield, at one point Arjuna says, he tells Krishna to take the chariot right in between the two armies for him to see the two sides. So if we observe carefully from that point onward, first Arjuna sees the two armies, and from that point onwards, he starts to he becomes greatly distressed after seeing the two sides, and then he starts to complain to Krishna about how can he kill his relatives and all that. So it all started when Arjuna wanted Krishna to be his order carrier. In the verses which we just saw, Arjuna simply told Krishna to take the chariot right in between the two armies, and then he saw the two armies and he was in distress. So we can clearly see whenever we wish for the Supreme Lord to be our order carrier, at some point, even he would simply carry out our orders, like how we have degraded ourselves by being trapped in this material world. It was all because of our material desires. And still, even after being trapped and encaged in this material body, we still expect the Supreme Lord to act according to our desires. We still want him to be our order carrier. So we are still not able to learn lessons from our past mistakes. And even from the example of a great exalted devotee like Arjuna, we can clearly see that all his problems started from the point when he wanted to treat the Supreme Lord as his order carrier. And throughout from that verse in 1.21 towards the end of chapter 1, and even in the first few verses of chapter 2, Arjuna told Krishna to take the chariot in between the two armies, and then from then on he started to complain until verse 7 of chapter 2, where he would surrender to Krishna and ask him to enlighten about what he should do. Only after he started to listen to the Supreme Lord, he became convinced to the point where in 18.73 he was convinced, and with a clear mindset he said, Karishiye Vachanam Tava. So even from the example of Arjuna in Gita, we can clearly see that all his problems started in chapter 1, from the point when he wanted to treat Krishna like an order carrier. But once he started to listen to what Krishna had to say, and he did not simply challenge Krishna, but he surrendered as a devotee and as a disciple to gain knowledge from Krishna. So we ourselves, we are caught in this condition as conditioned soul in this Dukkalayam, the material world, because of our past karma, where we actually wanted the Lord to be our order carrier. We have been getting all sorts of different material bodies, like the 84 lakh material bodies, because of our desires from the past. And even after so much of transmigration of our soul, we still tend to believe that the Supreme Lord should be our order carrier, because many of us, of course, I'm not referring to devotees, the non-devotees especially, they always want the Lord to be an order carrier. So they always say that, okay, if God exists, he should do this, he should do that. So that is the root cause of all the problems. So we can clearly observe from the example of Arjuna himself in the Gita. The Lord diminished the duration of life of the opposite party by his merciful glance. It is said that all the fighters who assemble on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attain salvation by personally seeing the Lord at the time of death. Therefore, his diminishing the duration of life of Arjuna's enemy does not mean that he was partial to the cause of Arjuna. Factually, he was merciful to the opposite party because they would not have attained salvation by dying at home in the ordinary course of life. Here was a chance to see the Lord at the time of death and thus attain salvation from material life. Therefore, the Lord is all good, and whatever he does is for everyone's good. Apparently, it was for the victory of Arjuna, his intimate friend, but factually, it was for the good of Arjuna's enemies. Such are the transcendental activities of the Lord, and whoever understands this also gets salvation after quitting this material body. The Lord does no wrong in any circumstance because he is absolute, all good at all times. In chapter 9 of the Gita also, it is stated, Krishna says that he is never partial to any living beings. He is, in 5.29, he says that he is the supreme well-wisher of all living entities. Living entities meaning that we know that living entities refer to all the spirit souls, regardless of whether it's human beings or animals or plants. So he is never impartial to any of the living entities. He is the supreme well-wisher of all living entities. However, he reciprocates to everyone according to their interaction with them. For example, in the case of Arjuna and Duryodhana, or the Pandavas and Kauravas, both sides, they had the chance to see Krishna face to face and interact with him. Like even before the battle, there was this effort to Krishna acted as a messenger of peace. However, Duryodhana said that he is not willing to give any share to the Pandavas, and he really wanted the battle to happen. There's always this propaganda by a lot of so-called intellectuals. They accuse Krishna of instigating the war, but they will never talk about this Muda called Duryodhana who wanted the fight to happen. They will always do everything they can to defend demons like Duryodhana and Ravana, but they will never address what really happened. It was Duryodhana who wanted the fight to happen, despite all efforts taken by Krishna himself as a messenger. But still, even at that time, Duryodhana himself he tried to even kill Krishna. So even Duryodhana had the chance to interact with Krishna, and it was the same in the case of the Pandavas. But we can clearly see that their exchanges were different. The Pandavas were very loving towards Krishna, but Duryodhana was acting in the exact opposite way. So the Supreme Lord is never impartial to any of the living entities, but we can clearly see that our interaction with him is what decides the outcome of everything. Even in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, it is stated here that he liberated everyone by his merciful glance. On the side of the Kauravas, all of them were eliminated, and even on the side of the Pandavas, only the 5 Pandavas were left, plus Parikshit in the end. So regardless of even the unfortunate events like the killing of Abhimanyu, all those who were involved in that war, they attained the special mercy of Krishna because they received the glance of him. before they quit their body. And as soldiers, all those who were present there, they were doing their duty, and therefore they were elevated to heaven. Even the Kauravas were elevated to the heavenly planets. So before we continue to the next verse, shall we take a 5 minute break?
Yes, to a 5 minute break.
Okay.
Make sure pause recording, pause recording.
Yeah, I paused already. Hare Krishna. Can you continue?
Yes, Prabhu Kiran.
Okay. Text 36. Yavaita pratana mukham nirikshya swajana vada vimukasya dosha buddhya kumati maharad atma vidyayas charana ratir paramasya tasya meastu. Yavahita, standing at a distance. Pratana, soldiers. Mukam, faces. Nirikshya, by looking upon. Swajana, kinsman. Padat, from the act of killing. Vimukasya, one who is reluctant. Dosha buddhya, by polluted intelligence. Kumatim, poor font of knowledge. Aharat, eradicated. Atma vidyaya, by transcendental knowledge. Yaha, he who. Charana, to the feet. Rati, attraction. Paramasya, of the supreme. Tasya, for him. May, my, astu, let there be. When Arjuna was seemingly polluted by ignorance, upon observing the soldiers and commanders before him on the battlefield, the Lord eradicated his ignorance by delivering transcendental knowledge. May his lotus feet always remain the object of my attraction. So here, the discourse of the Gita is being referred to. It all started from chapter 1. We saw from 1.21, it all started when Arjuna wanted Krishna to act as his order carrier, and Krishna happily obliged, to the point where Arjuna had to surrender again to Krishna to gain the transcendental knowledge. Throughout chapter 1, Krishna patiently listened to Arjuna. He listened to all his complaints, and then even in chapter 2, the beginning of chapter 2, Krishna tries to kind of tease Arjuna at first, but at only starting from the 7th verse, when Arjuna actually surrenders to Krishna as a disciple, from that point only Krishna starts to deliver the transcendental knowledge of Gita. So from chapter 2 onwards, Krishna delivers the knowledge of Gita in 17 chapters, and even in chapter 18.72, Krishna asks him whether have you understood clearly whatever I've spoken to you. And that's when Arjuna says that in 18.73, Arjuna replies that all my doubts have been cleared. I'm prepared to act according to your command. Karisya Vachanam Tava. The kings and the commanders were to stand in the front of the fighting soldiers. That was the system of actual fighting. The kings and commanders were not so-called presidents or ministers of defense as they are today. They would not stay home while the poor soldiers or mercenaries were fighting face to face. This may be the regulation of modern democracy, but when actual monarchy was prevailing, the monarchs were not cowards elected without consideration of qualification. However, we also know that there are some so-called democracies who also claim to be constitutional monarchies. So even in those monarchies, there are these so-called kings who take up weapons only for show purposes. They rarely participate in fighting. As it was evident from the battlefield of Kurukshetra, all the executive heads of both parties like Drona, Bhishma, Arjuna and Duryodhana were not sleeping. All of them were actual participants in the fighting, which was selected to be executed at a place away from the civil residential quarters. This means that the innocent citizens were immune from all effects of fighting between the rival royal parties. The citizens had no business in seeing what was going to happen during such fighting. They were to pay 1/4 of their income to the ruler, whether he be Arjuna or Duryodhana. All the commanders of the parties on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were standing face to face, and Arjuna saw them with great compassion and lamented that he was to kill his kinsman on the battlefield for the sake of the empire. So it is also stated here that the fighting took place at a place which was far away from the civil residential quarters. However, in the so-called modern world today, even in the two world wars, we have seen how civilians have been the main targets, and it's happening even now. In the name of fighting wars, all these so-called Kshatriyas of Kali Yuga, they target innocent civilians to display their valor. All the commanders of the parties on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were standing face to face, and Arjuna saw them with great compassion and lamented that he was to kill his kinsman on the battlefield for the sake of the empire. He was not at all afraid of the giant military phalanx presented by Duryodhana, but as a merciful devotee of the Lord, renunciation of worldly things was natural for him, and thus he decided not to fight for worldly possessions. But this was due to a poor fund of knowledge, and therefore it is said here that his intelligence became polluted. His intelligence could not be polluted at any time because he was a devotee and constant companion of the Lord, as is clear in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Apparently, Arjuna's intelligence became polluted because otherwise there would not have been a chance to deliver the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for the good of all polluted conditioned souls engaged in material bondage by the conception of the false material body. The Bhagavad Gita was delivered to the conditioned souls of the world to deliver them from the wrong conception of identifying the body with the soul and to re-establish the soul's eternal relation with the Supreme Lord. Atma Vidya, or transcendental knowledge of himself, was primarily spoken by the Lord for the benefit of all concerned in all parts of the universe. So in the first chapter of Gita, we saw that Arjuna was acting out of compassion for the enemies. However, that would have been seen as cowardice by the other side, and that is mentioned by Krishna himself in the 2nd chapter, because regardless of the fact that Arjuna was genuinely feeling compassion for the other side, Krishna also told Arjuna that even if you live out of compassion for your relatives, they will only think that you have fled out of fear only. So it is best to do your duty. This is stated by Krishna in the 2nd chapter. And in order to convince Arjuna further, Krishna spoke the entire Gita from chapter 2 to 18 at great length. And he was also answering a lot of queries by Arjuna throughout the discourse. And even in chapter 4, Krishna says in 4.3 that he chose to reveal the knowledge of Gita to Arjuna because he's not just his friend, but also his great devotee. So a devotee will not be bewildered or illusioned so easily, because even Arjuna himself has been a great warrior throughout his life. So it only happened due to Krishna's will, by making him bewildered before the battle, so that this entire discourse could happen. And it's also stated that Atma Vidya, or transcendental knowledge of himself, was primarily spoken by the Lord for the benefit of all concerned in all parts of the universe. So Bhagavad Gita is also known as Krishna Katha, which was spoken by Krishna. So when we talk about Krishna Katha, there's this Krishna Katha spoken by Krishna, and also Krishna Katha spoken about Krishna. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is often referred to as Krishna Katha spoken about Krishna. But if we look at the 2nd canto of Bhagavatam, in 2nd canto, chapter 9, 2.9.33, the Chatursloki Bhagavatam, that was actually spoken by Krishna to Brahma. The Chatursloki Bhagavatam was revealed by Krishna to Brahma, so that he, using that knowledge, he could then engage in the business of creation. So even the current edition of the Bhagavatam that we are studying is often referred to as Krishna Katha about Krishna. However, the entire science of God emanates from him. So it is also in some ways Krishna Katha spoken by Krishna. Text 37. Swanigamam apahaya mat pratijñā ritam adhikartum avapluto ratasta Tita rata charano abhyayat chaladgur hari rivahantum ivam gatotriya. Swanigamam, own truthfulness, apahaya, for nullifying, mat pratikñanam, my own promise, ritam factual, adi mo, kartum, for doing it, avaplutaha, getting down, ratasta from the chariot, rita, taking up, rata, chariot, charana, wheel, abhyayat, went hurriedly, chaladgu, trampling the earth, hari, lion, iva, like, hantum, to kill, ivam, elephant, gata, leaving aside, uttariya, covering cloth. Fulfilling my vow and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up its wheel, and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garment on the way. So this was also explained during the beginning of this session about the background of how the fierce fighting between Bhishma Dev and Krishna actually started when he was showering all those arrows directed towards Krishna and Arjuna. So at one point, even at that point, Arjuna was kind of unable to counter Bhishma Dev, and therefore Krishna himself got down from the chariot to save Arjuna from being killed. So at that point, it is mentioned here that Krishna was willing to break his promise, because he actually promised that he won't be taking out weapons to fight directly in the war, but he was willing to break his own promise just to protect Arjuna. The battle of Kurukshetra was fought on military principles, but at the same time in a sporting spirit, like a friend's fight with another friend. Duryodhana criticized Bhishma Dev, alleging that he was reluctant to kill Arjuna because of paternal affection. A Kshatriya cannot tolerate insults on the principle of fighting. Bhishma Dev therefore promised that the next day he would kill all 5 Pandavas with special weapons made for the purpose. Duryodhana was satisfied, and he kept the arrows with him to be delivered the next day during the fight. By tricks, Arjuna took the arrows from Duryodhana, and Bhishma Dev could understand that this was the trick of Lord Krishna. So he took a vow that the next day Krishna would have to take out weapons himself, otherwise his friend Arjuna would die. In the next day's fighting, Bhishma Dev fought so violently that both Arjuna and Krishna were in trouble. Arjuna was almost defeated. The situation was so tense that he was about to be killed by Bhishma Dev the very next moment. At that time, Lord Krishna wanted to please his devotee Bhishma by keeping Bhishma's promise, which was more important than his own. Seemingly, he broke his own promise. He promised before the beginning of the battle of Kurukshetra that he would remain without weapons and would not use his strength for either of the parties. But to protect Arjuna, he got down from the chariot, took up the wheel of the chariot, and hurriedly rushed at Bhishma Dev in an angry mood, as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He dropped his covering cloth on the way, and out of great anger, he did not know that he had dropped it. Bhishma Dev at once gave up his weapons and stood to be killed by Krishna, his beloved Lord. The fighting of the day was thus ended at that very moment, and Arjuna was saved. Of course, there was no possibility of Arjuna's death because the Lord himself was on the chariot. But because Bhishma Dev wanted to see Lord Krishna take up some weapon to save his friend, the Lord created this situation, making Arjuna's death appear imminent. He stood before Bhishma Dev to show him that his promise was fulfilled and that he had taken up the wheel. So here it is stated that Bhishma Dev himself also wanted Lord Krishna to take up weapons. So he also acted in such a way where it appears to be like he not only saved Arjuna, but he also fulfilled the promise of Bhishma Dev also. So this actually we saw some description regarding this entire scene during the beginning of the session also. Text 38. Shita Vishika Hato Vishirnadam Cha Shataja Paripluta Atataino Me Prasabam Abhisara Madvadartam Sabhavatu Me Bhagavan Gatil Muganta. Hita sharp, Vishika arrows, Hata wounded by, Vishirnadamsa scattered shield, Shataja by wounds, Paripluta smeared with blood, Atataina the great aggressor, Me my, Prasabam in an angry mood, Abhisasara began to move on, Madvadatam for the purpose of killing me, Sa he, Bhavatu may become, May my Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Gati, destination, Mukunda, who awards salvation. May he, Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. On the battlefield, he charged me as if angry because of the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows. His shield was scattered and his body was smeared with blood due to the wounds. The dealings of Lord Krishna and Bhishma Dev on the battlefield of Kurukshetra are interesting, because the activities of Lord Sri Krishna appear to be partial to Arjuna and at enmity with Bhishma Dev. But factually, all this was especially meant to show special favor to Bhishma Dev, a great devotee of the Lord. The astounding feature of such dealings is that a devotee can please the Lord by playing the part of an enemy. The Lord, being absolute, can accept service from his pure devotee even in the garb of an enemy. The Supreme Lord cannot have any enemy, nor can any so-called enemy harm him, because he is Ajita or unconquerable. So this is another key distinguishing feature of the concept of Bhagavan, because in many other belief systems, there is this concept of a very misleading concept of God representing the good side and Satan being from the other side. But Bhagavan is transcendental. He is not subject to dualities. He is beyond all these dualities. The Supreme Lord cannot have any enemy, nor can any so-called enemy harm him, because he is Ajita or unconquerable. This can also be observed from the childhood of Krishna, because there were so many attempts by Kansa to kill him, even as a child. But it appeared like he was being shifted from the prison to Gokula, then to Vrindavan. But all these pastimes actually go on to prove the real opulence of the Supreme Lord, because there's no other child who had killed so many other demons. Even as an infant, he killed Putana and Trinavrata and so many other demons. And the journey continued to the point where even Kansa had to be killed at the hands of Krishna himself. So all these demons were thinking that he was just a child, but they were proven wrong. And this is also another praman, especially from the context of the opulences of the Supreme, because Parashara Muni has defined the 6 opulences of the Supreme Lord, which include the opulence of wealth, strength, beauty, fame, knowledge, and renunciation. So even all these pastimes of Krishna from his childhood itself prove that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because simply by looking at his pastimes related to his strength, show that no other child could exhibit such superhuman strength, especially during the childhood. So, but despite all these facts, there are many other foolish people who claim to be incarnations of Krishna, but they cannot exhibit such opulences, not even one or two. But Bhagavan is the one who can exhibit all 6 opulences with unlimited quantity. He is Ajita or unconquerable, but still he takes pleasure when his pure devotee beats him like an enemy or rebukes him from a superior position, although no one can be superior to the Lord. These are some of the transcendental reciprocatory dealings of the devotee with the Lord. We also remember the Damodar Lila pastime. It is described in that pastime that baby Krishna was shivering in fear when Mother Yashoda was chasing him. So it is, though it appears unfathomable to think that the Supreme Lord can never fear anyone, but that is just the way he reciprocates to his pure devotees like Mother Yashoda. And those who have no information of pure devotional service cannot penetrate into the mystery of such dealings. So the reciprocatory exchanges can only be understood by pure devotees. For other foolish people, they can only say they can only they cannot understand the mystery of such reciprocatory exchanges. Bhishmadev played the part of a valiant warrior, and he purposely pierced the body of the Lord so that to the common eyes it appeared that the Lord was wounded. But factually, all this was to bewilder the non-devotees. The all-spiritual body cannot be wounded, and a devotee cannot become the enemy of the Lord. Had it been so, Bhishmadev would not have desired to have the very same Lord as the ultimate destination of his life. Had Bhishmadev been an enemy of the Lord, Lord Krishna could have annihilated him without even moving. There was no need to come before Bhishmadev with blood and wounds, but he did so because the warrior devotee wanted to see the transcendental beauty of the Lord decorated with wounds created by a pure devotee. This is the way of exchanging transcendental rasa or relations between the Lord and the servitor. By such dealings, both the Lord and the devotee become glorified in their respective positions. The Lord was so angry that Arjuna checked him when he was moving towards Bhishmadev, but in spite of Arjuna's checking, he proceeded toward Bhishmadev as a lover goes to a lover without caring for hindrances. Apparently, his determination was to kill Bhishmadev, but factually it was to please him. As a great devotee of the Lord is undoubtedly the deliverer of all conditioned souls. The impersonalist desires salvation from him, and he always awards them according to their aspiration. But here Bhishmadev aspires to see the Lord in his personal feature. All pure devotees aspire for this. So Bhishmadev was showering all those arrows, and to the point where it seemed like Arjuna was actually going to be killed by Bhishmadev. But the moment he saw Krishna taking the chariot wheel and charging towards him, Bhishmadev he stopped attacking, and he was just standing there to get killed by Krishna. So that was the true exchange between Krishna and his devotee. As a pure devotee, Bhishmadev was willing to be killed at the hands of Krishna, so that he would be able to see him when he was about to leave his body. And throughout this whole chapter, we can clearly see that how fortunate Bhishmadev was. So there's no other proof needed regarding the exalted position of Bhishma Dev as a great devotee. So it's going to be 9 p.m. now. The next one is quite long purport. So shall we stop here?
Yes, Prabhu. Okay.
Okay.
Continue next week.
Yeah, okay. So any questions or comments? Hello?
No, Prabhu.
Okay. So thank you all for attending.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Prabhu.
Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.